Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Sustainability Hub podcast brought to you by Poultry Network. And firstly, a thank you to our sponsors, to Alltech, to Alanco, the UK Agritech Centre, to Trow Nutrition, to Moy Park, and to Aviagen. Today, I'm joined by another genetics titan, Hendrix Genetics, and their UK distributor, Joice and Hill. And we're going to introduce Teun and Nick in a moment. We've got a change of scene today. We're in Peterborough, so it's an away match, and we've left our spiritual home of Chester, and we're going to do things a little differently today. We're going to split today's episode into two parts, starting with the global picture in respect of layer breeding and what sustainability means in the layer breeding sector, and then we're going to have a deep dive into the world of white birds, white eggs, debunk a few myths, and see where that discussion takes us. So this is part one. Um, Firstly, guests, please do introduce yourselves. Turn.
Okay, thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm Teun van der Braak, working for Hendrix Genetics as the global technical director for the business unit for the laying hens. Background in genetics, so that's what I will also be talking about during the podcast. So pleasure to be here and looking forward.
Fantastic. And Nick.
Yeah, so Nick Bailey, I'm the general manager of Joice Hill, which is the layer distribution arm of Hendrix Genetics in the UK. So we supply around one third of the UK's laying hen population. We're hatched here at Peterborough. So my background is in biochemistry, but I came via a fairly circuitous route to the poultry industry. I was very interested in nature conservation and tried to start a career in that, and that was very difficult to get funding. And so I do have a quite a sustainable background in that, but things went sideways, and I ended up in the poultry industry.
Once it's got you, there's no letting go, is there?
There's no
That's
letting
certainly
go.
what I
It's
found anyway.
yes. It's
Yeah,
like a hen's grasp. It's very
determined. Yeah,
determined. Yeah.
you're going nowhere. And so for us, sustainability, massive topic, means all sorts of things. We'll come on to that in a moment. But yeah, the world of breeding, I described you earlier as a titan. I don't think that's an exaggeration. Really, there's if I'm not mistaken, two main players in the world of poultry breeding globally, and Hendrix, one half of that pair. When we talk about genetics, when we talk about breeding, Turn, can you just give us a very simple sort of background as to the process, what's involved?
So to the process itself, well, the world of genetics, many people always think it's a very secret world, and that is something we try to open up our window blinds a little bit to make it more transparent in what we do today. So this podcast also helps in contributing to the transparency of our sector, because in the end, the only thing what we are doing at the moment is trying to identify the best animals in the world of in our pure line populations, and trying to identify the best animals and do selective mating. So really mating the best male to the best females, and to more or less safeguard that their offspring is better than the current generation, to make sure that every time when we do a selection, we are improving livestock to the desired direction of the market. It's not our direction, no, the market decides on the
And
direction.
that's a really important point, because what we're creating here is not our own flight of fancy. There's a massive driving priority, which is meet the global demand for food, for protein, for animal protein, and do so with as efficient use of limited resources as possible. You quoted some statistics to us before we
Yes.
started recording. Hit us with the numbers.
Yes. Okay. Well, if you look at the latest Rabobank reports, they predict that in the coming 10 years, the global egg industry will grow by 22%. So that means, if you look at the figures, that's close to 1 billion extra laying hens that need to be there in order to serve the planet, serve the needs of the human population in
In a
terms
decade.
in a decade, in the coming decade. So that is the growth is absolutely spectacular. And but also if you look back to the past, the growth has also been there. So it's we are every day in our day-to-day challenges. We need to address all the questions related to the theme. There is a growing demand, but the only way how we can supply the demand is by doing it in a sustainable way.
Mm.
And the sustainable way is there's a lot of different stakes around sustainability, as you know, of course. Yes, we are here in Western Europe. Yes, we are a Western European headquarter, with our operations headquarters in the Netherlands. So animal welfare is definitely there, but we operate globally. So it's also a lot about dealing with the limited resources that we have available today. So we're also definitely working on improving feed conversion ratios, trying to breed chickens that can cope with, so to say, lesser quality diets,
Yeah.
more byproducts in diets, etc., etc. But also we need to acknowledge the fact that there are global differences, there are regional differences in the way that we treat or animals. In our case, then laying hens, and that also relates back to the fact that there's different pressures around the globe. So, for example, already here in Western Europe, the disease prevalence is very much depending on the poultry density of the region.
Yeah.
So, for example, the Scandinavian vaccination schemes look completely different to
Well,
what
barely any vaccine, is that right? It's
exactly.
like Newcastle disease and that's
Exactly.
it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, a little bit more, but
Mm.
it's there's huge differences already here on this part of the continent. So, but
So
we
so does that if I'm right, that limits the age at which we can sort of stimulate lay and start to produce eggs because we've got to prepare a bird for a very complex environment
yes,
and therefore we take longer to do that than
absolutely. It takes longer to do so because during the past decades we've also shifted our breeding mentality from going towards preparing chickens as quick as we can in order to produce the first eggs and as much eggs as possible. And at the moment, it's really about the whole idea is about making sure that you're breeding a very robust animal
Mm.
that is able to stay in a good condition as long as possible. Because if she's able to stay in a very good, healthy condition, she will be much better able to produce more first quality eggs. And in the end, wherever we are around the globe, every customer we are asking, what is it that you want? What do you request from us? 99% of the farmers will say, I'd like to get more first quality eggs hen housed out of my chickens.
higher
And
yield.
these are things that benefit all markets. I mean,
All
all
markets.
markets are asking for feed conversion, which means less resources to
Yeah.
produce those eggs. The longer cycles benefit um, the welfare benefits in Western Europe, but also farmers in Africa or Asia. Or
Absolutely.
So
It
to that
ticks.
point, sorry, Teun, I was going to ask, does that then infer that there's actually not that much difference between, the birds, the breeds, if I use the word products, the different lines available in the UK versus the rest of Western Europe versus, the States or Asia? Are they all using pretty well the same few strains of bird, or is there market segmentation where you've got, a bird that has been more precisely developed for our climate, for European climate?
Well, there's two answers. So there is of course the global solution that there's one bird, one breed, or multiple breeds that fit multiple markets, multiple breeds. There are some regional differences where we really have unique breeds. For example, here the UK is one of those examples, which is the part of the higher segment, the top niche of the market, demanding a special chicken in terms, but mostly in terms of egg characteristics, the way the egg looks like, the way it tastes, the way it breaks, but especially the eggshell color itself. So that is a very unique market. But if you look on the global scale, then it's indeed a limited number of breeds that is able to fulfill to the market requirements. It fulfills the requirements of those markets with the way that we have bred and selected the chickens. Because what I said before, the goal for most egg producers is the same. They would like to get a sustainable income out of their business, and that is, in the end, selling eggs.
Yeah.
And the more eggs they can sell from their livestock, the more revenue, the better position they have. And in the end, as long as the farmers can make money in our sector, all the players in the market can get a small share of the value added to the market as well. And because I don't think it really lies with the consumer. The consumer is relatively ignorant about the whole production process.
Yeah.
We see it all around the globe. The majority of the consumer will never see the chicken itself. They're either not interested in it, they have no idea. They just want convenience food. They want to buy it in the supermarket. While the whole process behind it, there's a massive sector, the egg industry, the global egg industry. It's a massive industry behind it, where we are thousands, well, millions of people day in day out trying to do their utmost to make sure there's, I would say, the highest quality of animal
Mm.
protein available to the table of
It's
the
not just
people.
genetics,
It's
is
not
it?
just genetics.
It's animal health,
It's
it's
animal health.
equipment,
It's
it's yeah,
what we
nutrition.
always, yeah, what we always say. It's the phenotype. What we, I guess most of the owners know what a phenotype is, but otherwise that's the what you, yeah, the
I think
number of
you're normally
eggs.
talking to other people, Teun, because yeah,
Okay.
sat in this chair. Just for those of us that aren't familiar
Okay,
with
so
what you mean precisely.
phenotyping is more or less all the data that you are registering from your flocks.
Yeah,
So the number of eggs they produce, the quality of the eggs, the mortalities, feed consumption, water intake, feather cover, etc., etc.
yeah.
Those are all phenotypes, and in
The
the end,
characteristics.
the characteristics of the breed, and that is always an interaction between the genetics
Yeah,
and the role of the environment. So, as Nick already mentioned, the management, the vaccination, and especially the rearing in these days is absolutely crucial in the success of a laying hen during her lifetime. Its rearing is absolutely plays a major role in that whole process, whether producers can be successful,
yeah.
yes or not.
So rearing's super important.
Absolutely,
Yeah,
absolutely. We need to see really today rearing as an investment and
yeah,
not as a cost.
Mm.
Yes, money is getting out of it, but it is an investment phase. And I always say you can compare the rearing of a laying hen in weeks with the growing up of man, humans. So, but then in years. And it's absolutely, we need those 17, 18, 19, 20 weeks, whatever it is. There is variation around the globe related to that. And also depending on the housing system. Of course, for cage free, you need to invest more time in your rearing
yeah.
because it is really the training period of the bird. How
Especially as we keep hens longer as well.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Cut to the chase. UK. Most of our listeners will be in the UK, and you guys, both of you, travel extensively with Hendrix, the parent company, and Nick, you'll attend a lot of events with a lot of people. Do you think the UK does a good job of rearing generally, or are we playing catch up?
There needs to be more investment, I think, in multi-level rearing,
Yeah.
particularly as we get more multi-level farms. But in general, the attention to detail in rearing in the UK has drastically improved over the last few years.
And if we were, and you're incredibly diplomatic, and I realise as I asked the question, that's akin to me saying to you to shop your customers. So apologies to anybody rearing birds and the inference of my question. But if I said who does it really well, when you travel around,
Mhm.
who do you see has the best rearing systems
And
or the right approach?
I think if you look at what's happened in the Netherlands that moved to multi-tier free range and aviary systems already a long time ago, they invested more time in getting the rearing systems right for those laying systems, and we've had a transition in the UK towards free range, and at the start that was mainly what we call flat deck systems,
Yeah,
which is just a simple slatted deck with some nest boxes on top, and now we're in a situation where many of the new free range houses that are being built are on multiple levels, which is great for the bird. They move around and they can get up on perches and move away from birds they don't like and all the rest of the things. But that does require some training in the rearing period. And Turner is exactly right to say that it's an investment period. It's not a cost period.
if the ambition is to match the rearing shed with the laying shed,
Yeah.
then that investment that you're talking about in the laying shed has then got to be mirrored back down the track
Mm.
in the rearing farm. Uh, my experience of working in the commercial egg industry and having conversations with the laying hen farm owners and managers is that they're very focused on their feed price. Um, they're very focused on egg yield. They are highly sort of motivated to spend less on a pullet,
Yes.
but they don't put so much attention into exactly how that bird has been reared, or you know, the conditions of the rearing shed versus the laying shed, and their primary concern, um, not everybody, but many of them would just simply be, could they save a few pennies
Mm.
on the bird that arrives? That's is that just my experience, or is that kind of
Yeah, I think the whole environment's cost price focus. So that's for sure. It's been a very competitive industry over the years, and people have stand or fall on what they spend on cost of production. And of course, it's easy to shave a few pence off on your purchases. It's less easy to determine what the value of the extra spend that you make on those purchases, whether it's feed or whether it's the pullet that people are buying. It's much more difficult to ascribe success in the laying period to spending a bit more on the rearing feed and the training
mm,
equipment in the rearing period. Um, and I think this is where we want to talk about a little bit about differences between white and brown birds, because certainly our experience is with white birds. Especially some white birds, move into new situations and new laying quarters much easier than some brown birds do. Um, and so we're seeing things like floor eggs being much lower with some brands of white egg layer than others.
yeah.
And I think that's an important point. And we spoke earlier about meeting demands around the world, and the breeds that Hendrix Genetics breed. In brown, there's much less variation between the different strains of brown. In white, we see quite a lot of genetic variation, and we got some white egg layers that are extremely efficient in intensive systems, but we wouldn't put them on the Western European systems of free range and aviary. But we do have some white lines that are extremely well adapted,
Mm.
much by chance as anything else,
Yes.
to the kind of systems that we're now seeing prevalent in Western Europe and
Yep.
increasingly in the US. And yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. And well, part of it is luck, part of it is a very balanced breeding program behind it with a very intensive field testing program behind it. So that intensive field testing where we really have been selecting already for decades for behavior of the birds, and then especially more related towards the aggressive behavior. So selecting the social families that will maintain good quality egg production. Those are the families that you want to select, and the ones that are irritating each other, the cannibalistic families, the aggressors, we try to select them out as much as we can. And that is a very well, it has been not a revolution, but evolution, genetic evolution. It has been a process of several decades. And still today, as we speak, we are testing all over the globe. We are testing birds under field circumstances, and to make sure to select and identify those best families.
Is that has that testing changed over time as we go? Because I think about Europe. Europe's
Yeah.
gone from being largely intensive, and when we say intensive, we mean probably traditional cages, then replaced by enriched cages, or perhaps indoor cage-free aviary barn, large scale populations, to more, depending on market differences are obviously going to apply, but UK hugely dominated by free range, but organic as well in there. Does that transition through the different systems of production also bring with it a transition in breed that's better equipped for those alternative systems, or are we still using market by market the same breeds we always have, just trying to apply a different system?
Well, you definitely see differences between breeds, in especially towards behavior in a cage versus cage-free environment. Most often, we would say, okay, almost every bird can cope in a cage house system, but that is not the case for the cage free housing. So there you definitely see that the market is evolving into take up of different breeds. So for example, there are some breeds that are quite dominant here in the European continent and nowadays also in the North American continent, and less in the markets where there's still a lot of conventional cage housing. So definitely, there is a breed housing system type of interaction that you see. Some works, some don't work, and the ones that don't work, you really don't try to get into those systems again, because nobody wants to see naked birds, so that is definitely something. By testing, and especially via our intensive field testing, we're also trying to do that. So that intensive field testing, as you said, is not longer only in small groups, conventional cage housing. No, nowadays it's also in aviary housing, although that comes with its challenges. It's group house testing for chickens. It's still because of the size of the business. We're not talking about only 100 or 200 chickens on the total business. No, we're talking about 16,000, 32,000, 64,000 bird operations that we're talking about. And that's why I'm always, from genetics point of view, very jealous on the colleagues working on dairy selection. And so dairy breeders, they have a big animal where they can put a lot of sensors on. And nowadays, for the vast majority of all dairy cows, for example, in the Netherlands, they all have the sensors. They are all being milked with robots as well. So you know exactly from every cow how much milk she's giving, even how many times she's chewing. Also, the moment when she comes into heat. Everything is known now because of the sensor technology. But it works when you have a big animal under a roof where you only have 200 candidates, for example. For us, we are talking indeed about the complex farms with 10, 20,000 birds. And then RFID testing, it's possible, but it comes with its challenges.
And it strikes me that there must be some tension, because you go back, or certainly in my early days in the career, in my egg career, I remember genomics being an incredible development and accelerating the speed at which you could identify, those phenotypes, or the genetic characteristics that were preferred, and no longer had to run trial flocks for, you know full life cycles to be able to make selections. Whereas now, from what you're saying, I would interpret that accelerated choice is great from a scientific point of view, but it denies you that opportunity to actually look at the social and behavioural aspects that are now as equally important as productivity, or some of the other things that we might have looked for in earlier selection
It,
processes.
it does depend on the traits you're looking for, and particularly on the male lines, that's really helping because how do you evaluate the egg laying performance of a male? Is you have to wait for the offspring, his offspring, to come into maturity and their laying cycle before you can attribute um, traits to him.
Yeah.
If you know that that male is carrying a certain genomic pattern that is correlating strongly with things like shell strength, breaking shell strength, or egg color that you're after, then you can already make a pre-selection on those males, and that's
Absolutely. Yeah. But indeed, well, genomics, it only works when you do and continue your full phenotyping of all your birds. So it's not reducing any workload on our breeding farms or in the field testing farms, because genomics genotyping only works when you have valid phenotypes next to it, because every time you need to validate the whole SNP chipset. So that is an addition to the breeding program. But indeed, the good news is, and that's the benefit of running a laying hen breeding program, is genomic really has an advantage for traits that are later life traits, because you can do an earlier, more accurate prediction about the performance of the bird later on in life. And that is why it's contributing much more in the laying hen industry compared to in the broiler industry, because in the broiler sector, within 6 weeks, you already have all your data available. For us, it still takes today 3 weeks before we have all the genomic information back after we took the DNA samples and sent them to the lab. So but on a life cycle of 100 weeks, 3 weeks is not even significant. So it therefore it really definitely contributes greatly, and especially as Nick told, for the males, as the information indeed they give themselves is limited. You need to wait for their offspring. And especially if we want to look at the traits at 100 weeks or 120 weeks of age, that means that the male at that moment in time is 130 or 150 weeks of age. So those are quite old, grumpy men. Imagine a 3-year-old Leghorn male or a Rhode Island male. Those are quite grumpy men. And from a genetic, when you look at the genetic formula, you would like to use your parents for the next generation as quickly as you can, because therefore you can make faster genetic progress through the chain. But it only works when you are selecting the right candidates.
Mm.
So that combination of phenotyping in combination with the genotyping, that really is absolutely key. And indeed, with some of the social traits, it's relatively low heritability. So behavior is one of them. It's more difficult from us because the variation, the genetic variation is there for sometimes also limited. There's only so much you can do from a breeding point of view. And that's always, well, I think it's in every sector where you are. So whether you are in feed, people tend to put the claim towards the feed supplier. We are in genetics, supplying quality day-old chicks. When there's something with the chicken, they also try to blame the genetics, of course. But in many behavioral traits, it's not always the genetics to blame, because it's mostly the result of all the environmental interactions with it. So it's we only play a minor role in some of those
So,
characteristics.
so Tommy, you were asking earlier about as we've changed production systems in Western Europe um, towards more extensive systems, towards free range and organic and multi-tier aviary systems, barn systems. Um, ha has that changed the way we breed? For sure, we are using more floor-based testing
Absolutely.
than before. Some of the things we've done in the past, such as the field-based testing, where you're breeding for general livability of lines in field type environments, are playing out really, really well, especially as the length of the time we've been testing those birds, so 100 weeks in field situations. And that's really played out well for the lines in these more challenging extensive systems we have in Western Europe. But as we look round Western Europe, we've also changed which breeds of chicken. In particular, there's a move from brown to white egg layers. And the white egg layers, by happy chance, seem to be more coping with those systems a lot better than the brown. And if you look across different markets, the Netherlands is a prime example.
Absolutely.
When they switched voluntarily with a ban at retail level in 2005,
Yeah.
they switched from a lot of farmers switched from brown egg layers to white egg layers simply because the white egg layer was much easier to manage in those types of systems. And that's something that people don't talk about is also what is it like for the farmer. It's not just about, the metrics of farming, how many eggs have we got out of each bird, what the feed conversion is. It's also for the farmer in going into those barns
The
every day.
experience of
The
farming.
Oh yeah,
experience,
yeah,
the joy in your day-to-day job,
yeah.
and especially the breed choice contributes to the joy in your day-to-day job, and that
Mm,
is exactly the same for those farmers and egg producers all around the globe.
mm. But
So
but the Netherlands is an interesting case in point, and I think I understand that the chicken meat industry in the Netherlands equally have seen a very rapid transition from conventional to slower growing birds, which suggests that in those supply chains, agriculture through to processing and into retail, there is sufficient understanding, acknowledgement, and respect of the value of each of the participants in each of the parts of the chain to take account of preferences to allow change to happen and to facilitate change. Whereas I think I interpret our market in the UK as being quite resistant to that change, quite concerned about the effects of competition, particularly barriers, hurdles to making those changes. But what about the rest of the countries that also have seen a transition from one predominant color of egg to another? Is that driven by farmers? Is that driven by processors? Is that driven by a consumer? And with what motive?
okay, yeah. So what we see around the globe, and especially in the Western world, where there's most of the pressure on the producers, on the markets. So, and especially related to the theme of this podcast, the sustainability hub. So trying to produce eggs in a sustainable way, so that is respecting the welfare of the bird, respecting the planet that we live on, so with the limited resources that we have, responsible use of antibiotics, and so on and so on and so on. What we clearly see there is that some of those markets, the consumers are more willing to listen and to adopt the stories that the sector and the supermarkets are telling to them. And it's a matter about telling the truth, explaining the true story about what is the cost of production, what is the impact of a decision that you make on the carbon footprint, for example. Some decisions tend to be more welfare driven, especially here in the West. So, for example, the move towards the slow growing broiler, the Better Life 1-star chicken in the Netherlands. If you look at the whole sustainability aspects, it only ticks the boxes on animal health and animal welfare. It doesn't tick the boxes on carbon footprint, on efficient use of resources. There it ticks the box very negatively. Yeah? 20% larger carbon footprint, for example, for the slower growing broiler. But the good thing is about that is the consumer is willing to pay the extra price. And prices in the Netherlands, for example, they went up for €5 a kilogram of breast fillet towards, at the moment as we speak, 13 to 15 euros a kilo, while the cost of production is just 75 cents per kilo extra. So it's in the end, the biggest winner is the supermarket in that case. And that is the typical Dutch example where the supermarkets are driving the change based on the pressure of the NGOs. Especially in the case of the Better Life chicken, it was the pressure of wakker dier that came with the term plofkip, or explosion
Exploding
chicken,
chicken, yeah.
exploding chicken. Yes, exactly. And by naming, shaming, framing, they were so successful. And it were awful campaigns, absolutely awful. But it also showed that the sector didn't have an answer. It wasn't showing. It didn't came up with their story. So that is also a problem that we face around the globe. We, as producers of high quality animal protein, we are not well equipped to show our story, to tell our story.
Mm.
And while there is beautiful stories to tell,
Yeah. It's a
It's
real
interesting.
shame. I think it's a real shame on in that particular instance. It's a very narrow take on sustainability and entirely focused on a perceived gain in and an animal welfare without considering many other things, such as the carbon footprint of the food we're producing, such as the cost of food for working families to be able to afford to feed valuable protein to their kids. And that's not considered. It's all anthropomorphic judgment on the life of a farm animal.
absolutely.
Yeah, arguably sort of bowing to some pressures from some vocal people in certain places, and we're living in extraordinarily fast changing times where some of those sorts of ways of thinking and decisions are starting to be more and more openly challenged, and some people being very radical in terms of the reversal of that sort of general
Well, all
direction.
all debates have become much more polarized
Yeah.
and less nuanced, and I think that's the danger of the society we live in with social media, etc. Is it's very easy to make snap judgments about
Yeah.
things, and in life everything's much more nuanced than it at first appears.
I'm very nervous of potentially slipping in to try to put the world to rights with
Yes.
opinions on, well, certainly my opinions on social media and things like that. Don't do it, um, but I want to go back to Plofkip,
Yeah.
to the slower growing chicken movement, European, UK. I think that they're both in transition, or European further ahead than UK.
Yes,
UK
it's getting there.
absolutely in transition, and the question is, well, where's our food going to come from? How much will be imported? As Nick rightly says, what are the compromises? Because it strikes me that actually in the egg industry is the transition in our market from a brown egg market to a more balanced, or toward a whiter egg shell market, our equivalent to the slower growing chicken movement? And if it is, do we not have the ultimate message? Because we don't have in the laying sector, and this is the poultry network, so we're
Yeah.
friends of the meat sector as well. But in the laying sector, those compromises do not exist.
No,
Actually, it's a win, win,
it's a
win,
win-win-win. It's
win.
ticking all the sustainability
Yeah,
boxes, the wide laying in. So, and there, all the data shows it today as well. So there's more than 6% lower carbon footprint of a white egg compared to a
yeah, I
brown
saw
egg.
that.
So the data, it's all there. So it's proven there, but it's about, in the end, an industry can only be viable and sustainable. Is also the consumer is willing to adopt and willing to pay the value for it. And in the case of white eggs, we've seen it with our own eyes. I've seen it in the Netherlands, for example, where they started to introduce white egg, for example, as the premium egg. One big example is the little supermarket with the Kipster concept. So, introducing the most sustainable egg on the planet, that's at least what they claim. So, they introduced that egg and they were looking at the reaction, the response of their buyers. And what did they saw? Their public, the audience at Lidl, so a discounter supermarket, was willing to pay the premium price for a white egg. And why was that? Because the story was there
Yeah.
and they believed in the story, and the story was fully backed up with facts.
I'm going to go even further, and I'm going to also declare an enormous conflict of interest here as
Yes.
being someone who works for Kipster, and so a fully paid up member of a believer in that circular farming message. But I'd go further and say that the supermarket in question is also investing their marketing budget in talking about selling Kipster eggs because of the strength of those sustainability credentials. So yes, it's a white egg. Yes, it's different, and there are features to do with the animal around it. But there's also features to do with crucially the feed supply and the use of waste and the respect of the male chick as well as the female. But to see the supermarket market eggs, we don't see supermarkets in this country spending advertising money on eggs, or if we do, I apologize, but it's a fraction of a
Yeah.
of a marketing budget. But this supermarket did in the Netherlands, and it's on a minuscule proportion of every egg that they sell.
Oh yes, absolutely. And the funny thing or the interesting thing was it was not only them paying for it, also the NGOs
Yeah.
were paying for it. So they were really out and open to the public. They were congratulating Lidl and Kipster with the concept, with the first eggs being produced and promoting even it, because they say, okay, it does tick all the boxes. And we shouldn't forget also the land use, because, well, I'm from the Netherlands, I'm Dutch. Most of you know that the Dutch is one of the crowdest countries on the planet. So our land is very limited, and therefore also the price of land it's sky high. So, and all our land, because we're in the European Delta, is fertile.
Mm,
You can use it for farming as well, or for housing, or whatsoever.
yeah.
It's there's a value related to that land. So
And you talked about in sustainability the importance of the bird being able to cope with alternative feed ingredients,
exactly.
and where we're sat today, most birds being farmed will be fed on a wheat soya combination diet, and in different countries, wheat might be an alternative cereal, and but soy typically globally is going to be prominent in the protein source in
That's true.
the
Yeah.
diet. Whereas waste materials, co-products feel like the more sustainable direction of travel. Do those diets present a challenge to the laying hens in the same way that they do to the meat sector birds, who appear to be on a kind of much finer tightrope as far as adaptability to
Exactly.
food
Yeah.
source?
So that's the benefit of the laying hens. They are better able to cope with what I would always say poor quality diets, because indeed the broiler diet is one of the highest quality diets you
Mm.
can find in the field of all animal farming. It's a very highly quality diet. With chickens, and that's also part of our breeding philosophy, we need to include more and more byproducts, alternative sources, feed sources into the diet, because we know the pressure on the use of soya, on the use of palm oil in this part of the world. It's only growing. We now have the first declarations of supermarkets that say, oh, we only allow the sourcing of soya-free eggs. And while we also know from a producer point of view that soya is a wonderful protein, the chicken can perfectly digested, and it has a beautiful amino acid component makeup, so it's in that sense a superfood to provide to the chickens. But what we see by adjusting our pure line diets, we are able to breed chickens that are better able to cope with diets with more and more byproducts in it. And if we are honest, there is not enough byproducts, or at least leftovers from bakeries and pasta factories that you can feed into the chicken diets. The competition there is too high, and luckily the waste stream is getting less and less because everybody in the whole food chain is making improvements. But a chicken nowadays is relatively well capable to cope with those.
But that's a deliberate breeding strategy.
Yes, but it's a deliberate breeding strategy, absolutely, to make sure that we are prepared for the future. And that is what I always say. That is because many people always ask us, "Oh, it's so challenging for you guys to sit there with your breeding in the Western Europe. You're being bullied away." And I said, "Well, that's true. It's not easy to maintain our breeding activities in the western part of the globe. But on the other hand, we always say we are in the middle of the heat." So we have our eyes and ears open. So we know exactly what's going on. So we can much quicker adopt our breeding program towards the needs of this part of the society. And we know how to breed a cage chicken. But by being in the middle of the heat, we also know nowadays how to breed a cage-free chicken
Yeah.
that is capable to cope with the demands that all the stakeholders are asking in the future.
Yeah. Yeah. We've talked a bit about egg color. We've talked a bit about importance of rearing. Um, on the sorry, we've talked a bit about eggshell color. We've talked about the importance of rearing, the adaptability of birds to deal with perhaps changing diets in the future. We've slightly skirted around the topic of welfare. I'd like to come back to where welfare sits in the breeding program. What are the things that you're able to change? What are you measuring? What are the welfare challenges of the future in this market and beyond?
When looking from the welfare perspective, it's all about nowadays about having a bird that is resilient, robust, which is social towards each other. Although by nature chickens are not social, they tend to be rather aggressive animals, and that's also a very interesting fact. Where the domestication of the chicken started with, it was not for meat, neither for eggs. It was for cockfighting. And still, that's a big business around the globe today, all the cockfighting that is there. But that was where chickens initially were kept for their aggressive behavior. So then we still today need to tackle those characteristics which are there by nature inside the chicken genome. There are some quite aggressive genes to overcome. So especially the part of keeping birds in very large groups. And we know by research that on average a chicken is able to recognize about 100 other chickens. But in today's systems, well, minimum flock size is often 2,000, 3,000, 6,000 units, at least compartments within the unit. So that means for the chickens, a lot of new faces every day, every other day. So
But there are things we can do to help them.
absolutely.
So, for instance, now light technology, you're able to introduce UVA light,
Yeah.
which actually helps the chicken recognize other
Yeah.
individual hens, and that's UVA bulbs. I mean, there's a lot of discussion now in the UK industry about
Natural
putting
daylight.
natural daylight,
Yeah.
putting windows on houses, but you put a plastic window and it acts as a UVA filter, which is just the kind of light you're trying to introduce. So, but you can use a UVA bulb to help the hen
To help
visually.
the birds, to help the hens, and especially lighting strategies nowadays. And so also, especially in the aviary systems, you can really mimic dusk and dawn. Also, putting the right colors in to
Mm.
make sure that the birds get calm.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
never turn on the light, just choop, switch on the light switch, because that will cause a lot of stress for those birds. The way we design the nests, privacy when sufficient privacy when they produce the eggs. So I always say never save a penny on nest space. Those kind of things, very easy things. But the birds today, from a welfare point of view, also the feathering, of course, it's their first part of their protection system. It's the feather cover. So the better the feather stays on, the better the quality of the feather pack. It's will be easier for them to have their thermal regulation up and running, and it's also a defense part. So it protects them also from exterior challenges, so to say. So that is a big part of it. In bone health is an important one. In the end, well, for the producer, it's they want a healthy bird, and we know ourselves, especially related to bone health. Well, in the 70s, 80s, cage layer fatigue, the osteoporosis, it was definitely there. But via breeding, we have been able to take it out. They have stronger bones, more medullary bone to make sure that they are producing good quality eggs throughout their lifetime. And also, therefore, when you look at the past 20, 30 years, the egg weight curve, it has completely changed.
Mm.
So the birds today are producing quicker, larger, medium or large size egg, while the number of extra large eggs has significantly reduced.
You flattened
We
that
have
curve.
flattened the
Yeah,
curve,
yeah.
and that flattening of the curve is really putting less pressure, is lowering the daily demand for that laying hen. So she's better able to cope during her lifetime from a physical point of view, better to cope with egg production as
That's one of the
well.
Mm.
primary factors behind being able to extend the life, the productive life of a layer and the healthy life of a layer from
Absolutely.
70 weeks to 100 weeks plus.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Controlling the egg weight curve is
yeah.
definitely one of them. And genetics played a significant role in that because it is there's a heritability of egg weight of around, well, it depends per line per breed, 45 to 55%. So that's quite significant. The same with the body weights. Yes, from the 70s until 15 years ago, we definitely went down in body weight. But you see, during the past 15 years, the body weight of the birds is stable. Some of them even have increased slightly to make sure that they also have some reserves
Mm.
left in case of when there's a challenge. Because the bird, with the productivity they have today, they will produce that egg anyway.
Yeah.
But we should not squeeze the bird, you know.
But that's the
So
reason why you've kept feed intake levels
absolutely,
already stable for many, many
yeah,
years now, because you don't want to squeeze the intake levels of those birds that can challenge
yeah.
the healthy maintenance balance of the bird's physiology. Well,
If they're performing, then give them
Exactly.
the fuel to
It
continue.
will
exactly.
pay itself back. It will pay itself back because otherwise, if you will give them a crappier feed, the birds will compensate themselves.
Mm.
They have this biological feature that the bird can eat according to their needs.
Mhm.
So, and that's clear, one clear example is always when you have a naked chicken, your feed consumption goes up dramatically. So, you know, you can that they can eat 135, 145 grams a day. They are capable of doing so. No, it's not preferred that they do so, but if they have lost all their feathers, they need that energy to stay warm,
Mm.
to keep their condition on. So it's there you clearly see that interaction with the environment, and that is definitely all those factors play a big role in our breeding program today. So it's really bred today from the point of the laying hen to keep her in a fit condition all the way to the end. So that's why also in the latest week of their life, when they are at our pure line farms, we still measure the body weight to make sure to see, okay, how is the evolution? Did they become super lean, so skinny birds, or did they become super fat birds, or did they stay in very good condition? So those kind of traits we all adopted into the breeding program to
Mm.
make sure that the birds today are capable to withstand all the challenges in the
It's
field
that
that are out there.
resilience, isn't it?
It's resilience,
It's
yeah.
resilience, and to come back to what you were talking earlier about Kipster, there is a reason why Kipster have moved to white birds, where you've got challenging conditions. You're not beak treating those birds. You're feeding them byproduct diets, and the strain of bird that you use for those Kipster systems is coping very well with those pressures. And that's the benefit of having a broad gene pool.
Yeah.
And in particular in white, we see a much broader gene pool, and we're able to select within that gene pool for birds that really do cope with those kind of challenges.
Mm.
And there is a massive welfare uh, bonus to moving uh, to white birds for that very reason.
I don't want to cut you off on mid flow there, but we are going to come back after the
On the
break
white.
and we're going to talk about white
Mm.
in detail. Um,
As you
we
know, I'm a big fan.
I've put in an email somewhere this week. I'm a massive fan. Laying Hen Welfare Forum. We're conducting a survey, and Paula, big shout out to
Yeah.
Paula. Paula sent me an email saying, "Can I help with this?" I sent it to every farmer I know that's got whites, because I don't. I just think we just need to get on board. But yeah, we're going to talk about white. We can't talk about sustainability without talking about carbon. And Nick, I want to. We've talked a lot about breeding. Let's just talk about hatchery for a minute, because you've had a bit of news in the course of the last fortnight.
Yeah.
You've done a lot of work looking at the sustainability of your distribution business, and I wonder if you could just sort of explain to us what you've been doing.
So we chose egg base because we worked with egg base on other projects such as the data collection, which is very important for feeding back to the genetics department about how well the birds are actually performing in the field. A lot of very useful data there to capture. So we chose egg base to do a scope 1 and 2 assessment on the hatchery. We have made some steps in terms of investments in the hatchery over the last 3 or 4 years. So we set a baseline of 2020, and since that 2020 baseline, we've invested in solar panels, we've invested in renewable energy in terms of heat pumps, etc. And we've also done some electrification of the sales team's fleet. And those have really struck benefits. I believe the scope 1 and 2 emissions have come down by 8%, but during that period, we've also produced more hens. So the 2024 readout on carbon footprint per chick is actually a falling of 17%. So
Mm.
17% less carbon to produce the same day old chick.
Yeah, the numbers are fantastic. Is there more to go? Is there anything that you can do? What's your outlook?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, we're obviously going to bring in scope 3. Um, I think with and obviously feed is not our area of speciality, and you'll probably do a separate podcast on that. But the improvements in feed over the years, especially use of enzymes, etc., has really reduced
Mm.
that carbon footprint again.
Yeah,
I mean, stepwise. It's a gradual process.
yeah.
I think the other big thing on feed, of course, is that is that balance. A lot of carbon footprint in feed comes from the land use change, in particular of soya, and that's something we're challenged with in Western Europe, where it's become a very important concept. And I think if you look at North American soya, it's lower carbon footprint because it hasn't got that land use
Yeah, correct.
thing in there. But of course, if everyone switched to North American soya in Europe, then that Brazilian soya would still go somewhere
Yeah.
else. And what the good thing that's happened in South America is starting with the change to GM free soya. The supply chains in South America were adapting to segregated supply chains, and what we're seeing now in South America is they're able to segregate land use change soya as well. So there is some benefits to
Mm.
what's happened in the past.
Mm. It's not just about soy, I think, is what I would want to remind people. If I could talk to anyone, it would be a retailer. We'd love to get a supermarket on here and say, Look, why can you guys not give a signal to the market to say we want X percentage inclusion of a UK grown protein,
Yeah,
peas
meal
and
beans.
peas
Yeah,
and beans? Why are we not saying
yeah.
to the feed mills or to the supply chains that go right the way back to an arable grower, get peas and beans in the ground, and let's have birds, please turn, that are capable of living on a proportion of these peas and beans that actually get us out of
And of
being
course,
completely
also
reliant on soy.
processed animal protein as well that's been banned for many years in the
There's
UK.
a consultation underway at the minute, isn't there? And the
Mm.
people I talk to, and I've heard different views, but the people I talk to are very confident that will be, legalised again in the relatively near future.
It's not the whole answer, but it's there.
But
Yeah.
that's got to be it, hasn't it? A compound, let's have 5% meat and bone meal, let's have 5% UK grown protein, and suddenly
Mm.
our soy requirement is low single digit, if anything.
But to come back to what we can do on chicks, there are still moves that we can make. There are things that we can do further. Wind turbines, of course, but also things like smart motors. We've got a lot of motors in the hatchery, and the historically old motors were either off or on, and now you see many more companies investing in smart motors that have
Mm.
a infinite variable speed on the motor. So we got things like fans in the hatchery, which if we transferred all of those motors to smart motors, I think we can gain some savings there. I
Yeah.
mean, they're more expensive to buy, so it's an investment again. But I think over those kind of technologies will come along, and that we were seeing those in other industries. I think one of the reasons we haven't done it yet is the company we were talking to is so busy installing these smart motors into people like Rolls-Royce that we're kind of low down the food chain in
Yeah. Well.
terms of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, from what I've seen, the work that you've done so far, I just think it's absolutely fantastic. So yeah, take my hat off to you.
Again, it's all win-win stuff, isn't it? I mean, like the conversation we're having about egg layers being, becoming more and more sustainable, with very little downside
Mm.
in terms of what they're doing. But improving the energy efficiency of your operations is a win-win. I
Yeah,
mean, it lowers your cost and it improves the environment. It's just a win-win all around,
yeah.
really.
Let me take you to another technology that could come into the hatchery that may result in you needing to hatch less chicks. Dare I mention the words in ovo sexing? And
Yeah.
and and I wonder between you, I mean, Turn again, looking at the European market that appears to have made its call, and many hatcheries, if not most hatcheries.
Oh no, not most, most,
No,
most. No, 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 no.
yeah,
So it's but there's definitely a trend going on that in Western Europe, where it all started, the hatcheries are adopting the sexing technology. So, for example, Germany is there, France is there, Norway is there, Switzerland is there. The Netherlands is well, all the hatcheries are equipped with it, but it's still there is not. Well, 2 weeks ago they also announced that there's now the market commitment to adopt it, but it's not by legislation. And we there see quite some differences between the EU member states, and that's why there's no common goal, common date, common legislation around it, which is sometimes resulting in the fact that it's yeah, there's a lot of question marks. There's also a lot of big differences between the different EU member states.
mm,
So, for example, in France, you only need to apply it for brown chicks. You need to do it before day 15, for example. While in Germany, it was very strict, and they had the goal to go before day 4 of the incubation process. Then they found out, well, at this stage in time, it's not going to happen because it are relatively new technologies, and there is still so much further development going on that yes, there are some technologies that have been implemented, but it's a lot of trial and error, and therefore the benefit for the UK market is if you can wait a bit more, you will be able to adopt better technologies
yeah,
in your hatcheries, which are much better accepted by the market itself.
mm.
Because we already had in the first newspapers embryo abortion. So it's the whole discussion of culling a male chick.
I'm not surprised. You go back,
It's
to that French statistic that you've just said. Day 15, brown birds
and
over.
only for
That's
browns, not for the
that's
whites.
an incredibly
Yeah,
low
and then
bar.
all the sexing errors that you come across, you can still kill
Yeah,
at day old in the hatchery. So it's well, in Germany, you're not allowed to kill any
yeah,
off sex. So it's you need to grow all your male chicks that are being born as well. So there is so much differences between the continent, and that it's not very easy. And therefore, and also what I see about, for example, the select technology. The developments they are making, they are now at the third or the fourth module, because the first devices required a lot of human input. A lot of labor was invested with that as well. And we all know in the blue collar job all across Western Europe, the difficulties to find blue collar workers, people willing to work in a hatchery. And those are all those kind of challenges that the good thing is they are being overcome. So there's new innovations coming along. The technologies are further and further being developed. But
I guess that comes with risk, though, doesn't it? I
yes,
think if I take a step back and think, 10 years ago, it in ovosexing would have been, laboratory possible, scientific
yes,
dream, a bit of a nirvana,
yeah,
and not commercial. And to see where we are now, where, as you say, most hatcheries have got something installed. It may be different technologies. It may not be for every hatch that they're using it, but that's quite some speed of development. But I guess
We,
those early investors, sorry, Nick, the early investors have probably taken an enormous risk with high capital cost that
of course,
could quite quickly become out of date if the
but
technology moves on.
this is a classic case of legislators being pushed by an extremely vociferous minority lobbying group into making legislative changes that had unintended consequences. I'm wholeheartedly for solving this question. I think there will be a innovative technology that comes along in the short term that will provide a very good solution. I think the solutions that have been forced to be implemented in those countries where they've had the legislation have had some very negative consequences. In Germany, for instance, um, several of the small, very nice hatcheries went bankrupt because they could not afford to implement innovo sexing technology. Still, 30% of um, males hatched in Germany, I understand, are exported to Poland to be grown for a meat that nobody wants.
Mm.
So there are some very unintended consequences with that, and the technologies that are implemented still have significant downsides. They're either very slow and invasive, or you can't do them earlier than 12 days, and there are levels of accuracy questions there, from what I understand from my French colleagues. So, and they're very energy intensive. So, using an MRI scanner in the hatchery to determine the sex, I mean that raises some ethical questions. If you can afford an MRI scan, why would you not put it into a hospital? Why would you put it into a chicken hatchery? I mean, it's crazy. And the other thing is, of course, it raises the cost to the consumer, and we're talking about a very important food staple here. I mean, eggs would provide a very low cost protein to working families, we're seeing this pushback happening in Europe against so-called sustainable policies that are basically pushing up cost of living for small families, and that's very easily jumped on by populists
Yeah.
and saying, well, we should push back against the whole lot, and you risk throwing away all of the sustainable gains that we're trying to make for the sake of rushing into a technology. And I really think, I feel strongly that in the UK scenario, we shouldn't jump into technology just because a couple of announcements have been made in Europe that it is technically feasible to do some level of innovo-sexing. I think we should wait until we have a proper solution that is early, that you can gain an actual benefit for consumers in terms of the cost of production, and does away with this problem of male chicks coming into life and being euthanized straight away. I mean, the other thing to consider, of course, is in the UK, we're a net importer of male chicks. So we have a lot of people who keep raptors and reptiles that need that whole food. And if we stop supplying that market with male chicks, then something else will be brought into life.
Back to your unintended consequences and what do we,
Of
yeah,
course, yeah.
what do we do?
And
So,
those and that would be probably an entirely unregulated food chain. And
yeah.
already in the Netherlands, they're raising mice in cages
Yeah.
to supply a market. It's crazy.
It's an interesting discussion, and I guess it serves as a useful full stop on the conversation that we've had
Yeah,
in part one,
absolutely.
because it
Yeah.
shows just how nuanced and how often conflicted the topic of sustainability can be. I think my take from our conversation today is um, breeding is enormously complicated, and that it isn't just in a laboratory and a snip here and a decision
Mm.
there and away you go. It's a very long term project, and the physical characteristics of birds take time to develop, and the science is just part of it. That actually the egg industry has got some very strong sustainability credentials, but also untapped potential in our market in the UK to step up to that global challenge turn that you talked about with the
Yeah,
with the 22% additional volume required over the course of the next decade. We've talked a bit about market segmentation. And precise needs of the market and the tensions that come with welfare. So it's been a fascinating conversation. Nick and Teun, thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to be back in a minute. We're going to talk about white eggs, but for the moment, that's the end of this episode. Again, I'm going to quickly thank our sponsors, Elanco, Alltech, UK Agritech Centre, Moy Park, Aviagen, and Trow Nutrition. I've been Tom Willings, and you're listening to the Sustainability Hub podcast brought to you by Poultry Network.